All right, it's good to be with you once again. And today we're going to talk about 4 ways to help your spouse reframe. And I'm excited to share this with you. I think this is a really helpful strategy and technique in working with your partner and helping build a more positive relationship. So stay tuned. Four strategies to help your partner reframe. So let's talk about what reframe is. Reframe is a term that we use a lot in the clinical world, the therapeutic and counseling world. Reframe means that we help an individual take an experience from one meaning and transfer it into a different meaning. Right? So we're helping them see a thing a little bit different, or feel about a thing a little bit different, or behave with a thing a little bit differently, right? So either in mind or in emotion or in behavior, we're trying to shift from one frame to a new frame, right? Like helping them see, feel, or experience it in a little bit different way. That's what we call a reframe. And reframings are really helpful when a person kind of gets stuck in an unhelpful thought or unhelpful emotions or unhelpful behaviors. Reframes can be really powerful tools in helping an individual transfer from one way of thinking, feeling, or acting into a new way. So we call that reframe. So then you can think about, okay, in your relationship, what are some things you would want your spouse, your partner, to reframe, right? What are things in my relationship that might be helpful if my spouse could just see it a little different, or feel about it a little bit different, or approach it a little bit different, that it might be helpful, right? And this is something that I help couples do quite frequently in their relationship, is helping them kind of transfer from one set of thinking, feeling, and acting to a different set, right? So thinking about that in your relationship, helpful reframes. An even better question might be, what are some things that would be helpful if I reframed in my relationship, right? That I thought about it different, I felt about it different, or I approached it, behaved with it differently, right? What are some things that would be helpful for me to reframe? That can be a great question. The reason I say maybe even a little bit better question is because the self, the me in the relationship, is the thing that I have the most effect and control over, right? And so if I'm going to pursue change in my relationship, that change beginning with me is a really good starting point, right? So thinking about that, reframes in your relationship. I'll share with you an example. I have a couple that I work with who, from the very beginning of their relationship, he wasn't very good at emotional intimacy. And emotional intimacy just means my ability to emotionally connect with my spouse, that he wasn't very good at that. And he struggled with emotional intimacy. In fact, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about emotional intimacy, how emotional intimacy works, how to build it, right? How to grow your emotional intimacy in the relationship. You might take a look at our Maintaining Intimacy and Sex video course. Part 1 would be the best one to begin with. And in that video course, we go over emotional intimacy in quite a lot of depth. And we look at kind of the role and the power of emotional intimacy and how to help you build it in a relationship. But back to this couple, he really struggled with emotional intimacy. And because of that, it was very difficult for him to connect with his spouse. From the very beginning of the relationship, he had a really hard time offering his heart and his mind to his wife. And as a result of that, they grew apart over time in their relationship. And she interpreted his lack of emotional connection as him being frustrated with her. Almost like she was inadequate to him, right? She kind of internalized it as meaning that she wasn't enough for him, right? That somehow he had this capacity to do this emotional connection thing, but that she just wasn't valuable enough, or she didn't matter enough for him to do it with her, right? And as a result of that, it created a lot of pain for her over the years. In the beginning, she didn't talk about it. She would just feel hurt about it, right? That he would be a little bit emotionally cold, or emotionally preoccupied, or emotionally distant, or emotionally distracted. And she would feel hurt by it. She would almost even try to perform in different ways in the relationship to see if she couldn't get him to offer more of it to her. And again, she was operating off of the mentality that he was perfectly capable and skilled at doing emotional intimacy, right? But that he just didn't feel like she was worthy or valuable enough to receive his emotional intimacy. And so it was really causing a lot of pain in her. And internally, that pain was building up over several years. And after about 5 or 6 years of that, it started to turn into resentment. She started to feel frustrated and cold and upset and angry with him in the relationship. And it's about that time, about 5 to 6 years into the relationship, that he started to realize she was feeling some of these things. And he started to realize she was feeling some of these things at that time because it was when it started to become resentful inside of her and she started to feel angry inside that he started to hear about it. That's about the time she started to bring those big emotions to him. And as a result of that, he kind of became clued in to her dissatisfaction about 5 or 6 years into the marriage. But it was much earlier than that in their relationship. It was in the first 6 months that she was actually starting to feel hurt by this emotional intimacy thing. And she was feeling hurt for 2 reasons, right? One, because of the actual injury being that she wasn't receiving a lot of emotional intimacy. And that can be really hard for spouses in a relationship. But the second reason it became really difficult for her is because to her, the frame that she put it in, right, the way she understood it in her mind and the way that it impacted her heart, right, is that he was withholding emotional intimacy because she wasn't valuable enough to receive it in his eyes, right? So it wasn't in her mind, it wasn't that he wasn't skilled at it, that he was kind of ignorant to how to do it well. In her mind, he was very capable of doing it and that he was purposely withholding it to kind of reflect her inadequacies to him. That she was inadequate, therefore he's not going to give her connection, right? And you can imagine how hurtful that can be. It makes complete sense that 5 or 6 years into their relationship, she's feeling a lot of resentment and anger and frustration in the relationship. But for him, he kind of felt blindsided by it. And so they came into couples counseling, and here we are working together, and they're presenting this issue. She's like, he's never loved me. He's never cared about me. I've never mattered to him. I'm always inadequate to him, right? And he's sitting next to her being like, that's not true at all. I do love you. I've always loved you. I don't know why all of a sudden you're mad. It seemed like you were pretty happy up until about 6 months ago when we hit this kind of 5-year mark in our marriage. You got really upset with me out of the blue for no reason. And that's not true either, right? On both sides, you can kind of see how they're confused in this, right? That she for so long has been internalizing that his lack of emotional intimacy means that I don't matter to him. And he has kind of ignorantly, blissfully been going through the relationship until very recently, feeling like things are fine. And now all of a sudden, I'm getting all this pushback and irritation and moodiness from my spouse, right? So this is the way that they came into couples counseling. And it became very clear to me as we started to understand their story that there needed to be a reframe for her while he worked on emotional intimacy, right? So my focus became, how do I help him learn and understand a little bit more about what is emotional intimacy, how to foster it, how to provide it, right? How to learn your spouse in a way that you can give it more readily in the relationship. That was going to be important for us to do. And the other thing that was going to be important is for her to reframe why she hasn't been experiencing it, right? Because if she doesn't reframe why she hasn't been experiencing it, even though he's practicing giving it now, she can still feel like accidentally stay in the emotional space that says, he has taught me for years that I'm not worthy of it. And that might cause her to feel major depression at minimum, and at maximum, that could also continue to fester a lot of resentment to her partner, right? So she could feel worthless, and then she could be really upset at her spouse for treating her worthless for so many years. So important on both sides, right? He needs to build emotional intimacy and the capacity to offer it, and we need her to reframe. So as we talk with her about reframing, right, there's several things that the spouse, the husband, can do to help her reframes. And it's those 4 things that I wanted to go over in this video today, that if you find yourself in a place that either you're trying to reframe something or you're trying to help your spouse reframe something, these 4 strategies can be really helpful and effective. And the first strategy is to be preemptive. Now, preemptive just means that we're trying to be preventative, right? That we're anticipating a thing before it happens, and we're trying to intervene before the thing happens, right? So in this story, in this couple that I've shared with you about, an example of him being preemptive with his partner would be that on his way home from work, maybe, he knows he's going to see her for kind of the first time in the day. It'd be good for him to get in the mindset of how can I offer her some emotional intimacy as I come home, right? Because we know that he hasn't been practiced at it. He's not really good at it. And if he's not being thoughtful about it, he's probably not going to do it, right? So we want him to be preemptive. We want him to think and anticipate, right? I want to intentionally try to offer this thing as I get home. And for her, we want her to be preemptive in thinking in terms of, okay, he's going to come home and he's probably this evening going to make an attempt to try to connect with me, right? And I want to be prepared to try to receive that, right? It might be awkward, it might be mechanical, it might not be very well rehearsed, and that's okay because he's not good at this thing, right? We want her to be preemptive with the reframe versus her thinking, he's not going to do this thing because he doesn't care about me. And if he tries, it's going to be lame because he doesn't really care about me that much, right? That frame, if she stays in that frame and she doesn't preemptively move that frame, it's probably not going to go well even if he tries to deliver the emotional intimacy, right? So that would be a way in which both could be preemptive. They're kind of anticipating the next moment that I can try to help this reframe. And I'm being intentional about creating this reframe, him supporting her feeling more emotional intimacy and her preparing herself to receive more emotional intimacy. So that's the first one, be preemptive. The second strategy that an individual or couple can use in helping a spouse reframe is to be overt, right? So this strategy of being overt just means I want to make it obvious, right? I want to make it big enough that it is obvious to my partner. So for example, if the husband is doing really subtle, low-level emotional intimacies, and if you remember the video course that I mentioned earlier, the Maintaining Intimacy in Sex Part 1 video course, right? An example of that would be like making small talk with her or doing a little bit of engaged listening, right? So we're talking about very low-level emotional intimacy strategies. If he's just tipping his toes in very low level emotional intimacy, it's probably not going to be overt enough for her to feel his efforts to connect, right? We want him to try to take on a little bit bigger, more obvious signs that he's offering emotional intimacy. That's this be overt thing. If it's too subtle, your spouse might miss it, and it's not going to be helpful in allowing them to reframe, right? So for the husband to his wife, we really want him to be overt. We want him to make a little bit bigger, more obvious efforts at emotional intimacy. And for the spouse, right, for the wife, she could be overt with herself as well by being very focused and saying, okay, listen, it might start a little subtle with him because he's just practicing, right? And so I want to make it obvious that I'm seeing his efforts, and I want to make it overt that they make a difference, right? Even though they're not on the level that I would want long-term, I want to nurture those efforts overtly. I want to be overt and letting him know that they matter, they're meaningful, and that he should keep doing them, right? So on both sides, this principle of be overt. The third strategy is to be apologetic. Now, the reason we have this apologetic one in here is because the husband's going to mess up, right? As he's trying to help his wife reframe by learning this new strategy and technique of emotional intimacy, he's going to mess up. He's not going to be an expert from the beginning. So we want him to be quick with an apology, right? To be apologetic about that. He doesn't have to apologize about sucking, right? That as a person, he's just flawed, and I'm so sorry you have to be married to me. That's kind of a passive-aggressive apology, right? We want him to be apologetic in that I'm sorry my efforts don't represent my love, right? And I want them to. I know I'm not good at this yet, and I want them to. You're worthy of my love, and I do love you, right? I'm just not good at this thing. We want him to be apologetic that way, right? When he realizes that effort is falling short. And we want her to be apologetic as well as she's working the reframe on her end as well. We want her to be apologetic, right? I know I didn't do a good job at remembering that you're trying. and remembering that you're not good at this, right? I took it really personal yesterday and I blew up at you and I'm sorry, right? So that being apologetic can help both as they're trying to reframe this dynamic in their relationship, right? Being apologetic kind of helps me identify I messed up with the frame and I'm trying to get back into the right frame, versus a non-apologetic approach almost encourages both parties to believe that the old frame, the one we're trying to get out of, the unhelpful one, the one that says that she's inadequate to receive his love and he's intentionally not giving it, right? If he's not apologetic when he's messing up, and if she's not apologetic when she's not doing a great job at the reframe, it's much more likely they're going to stay stuck in that old frame than move to a new one, right? So we want to move to a new way of thinking, a new way of feeling, a new way of behaving. And apologizing can be a great way to indicate I've gotten off course and I want to get back on course, right? So be apologetic. The final one is to be assertive, right? So we don't want to be passive with change. If we're too passive with change, if we're too nonchalant, right? If we kind of think about changes, I'll get to it eventually, it's probably not going to happen. Most change requires a lot of effort and a lot of focus, especially in the beginning. We've got to be assertive about creating change, right? So we really want the husband in this case to be really assertive about learning emotional intimacy and practicing it often, and getting outside of his comfort zone in practicing that emotional intimacy. That's kind of the optimal growth place that we talk about in this YouTube video here. And I would love for you to learn a little bit more about that, right? Getting out of the comfort zone and really creating growth. So we want him to be assertive about that. And for the wife, we want her to be assertive about receiving his efforts, right? We really want her to be mindful, attentive, and supportive, right? Even reassuring as he's trying. We want her to be assertive about attacking that old frame, that old way of thinking, and pushing it out, making room for the idea that he does care about me. He's just not good at this thing. And it's okay if he's not good at it in the beginning. He'll get good at it, right? And if I can be as supportive in that process, he'll probably get good at it quicker, right? So you can see how being assertive is so important for both parties when we're working to reframe the way that we're thinking, the way that we're feeling, the way that we're behaving in a relationship. So those are the 4 tools, right? Those 4 strategies for helping your spouse reframe in the relationship. The first to be preemptive, the second to be overt, the third to be apologetic, and the fourth to be assertive. I hope these tools are helpful to you, and I would love to hear in the comments below times that you've tried some of these things on, right? Times that you've tried to help foster a reframe in your partner, or times that you've worked to create a reframe in yourself. And share with us which of these 4 were most helpful to you. We'd love to hear about that in the comments. As always, we're so grateful to spend the time with you. If you know anybody around you that could really benefit from this topic and from this video, please share it with them. We're on a mission to help couples everywhere, and we sure appreciate the support you give us in that process. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.